Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software. And in today's session, we're going to go through the family processor. We're going to cover a comprehensive introduction on this incredibly powerful tool out of the BIM Manager Suite. Now, as always, we encourage you to throw questions into the GoToWebinar questions window when you participate with us live here in the webinar. Those of you watching the recording after the fact, you can certainly reach out to us as well and get answers to any questions you might have about these tools after the webinar proper has finished up. Also, as always, we record these webinars, obviously, if it's going to be recorded and people are watching it in the future. So certainly feel free to jump over to our YouTube channel and subscribe over there to understand when our webinar recordings go live. So without further ado, let's jump right in and talk about today's topic. So here's the truth of the matter, right? Making changes to any kind of Revit family content, especially when you're doing a lot of changes, especially a lot of repetitive changes, it's just incredibly time consuming and it's incredibly manual. And often those of us with the skill set to go through and make these changes to families, usually our time is in high demand. We can't spare days or weeks or sometimes months of time to go through and open up family by family in our library and manually make these changes. So really what happens most of the time is that our libraries of content just stagnate. And when issues crop up ad hoc, we just handle them, one at a time, issue by issue. And these changes can often span multiple years. They're all handled in different ways, sometimes even by different people in different styles. And then our library just isn't cohesive. It just doesn't work well together. And so here in this webinar today, in this session, I want to be showing you how to leverage Family Processor. Now, the power of this tool really helps you define your changes and then apply those changes either over multiple families or even a single family sometimes. But really, the whole point of this is that you can save, as a BIM manager, you can save tons of time throughout your whole library maintenance cycles. You can use this for annual upgrades. You can use this for daily workflows. Choice is yours. The point is, this can save you tons of time. In fact, I have maths behind this that shows that Family Processor can literally be 1,000 times faster when making batch changes across your library rather than doing it by hand. So what are we going to cover today? Well, I want to give you an introduction to the Family Processor interface. It's important you understand how it works. You obviously want to know a little bit already about family creation and parameter management the manual way, but I'm going to show you how to leverage this Family Processor through the user interface and give you a general idea of what the workflow is. Now, we're going to go over the actual family repair configuration process. I'm going to go through the settings. We're going to establish some of the settings. I'm going to focus these settings on a single family, which is how I recommend you use this regularly anyway. And we're going to plan for how we can use this on multiple families and how that could be run potentially across a lot of content. And then, of course, at the end, we're going to review some of the saving and loading of settings so you can take what you do in one session and make it 100% repeatable across multiple future sessions. So if you establish configurations for a particular manufacturer's piece of equipment or a particular door fix that you do once, it's entirely possible you may have to do that similar or exact same fix again in the future. If more content creeps up, that shows the exact same problem. And so we're going to show you how you can save and recall your settings to make 100% repeatable workflows. First things first, let's take a look at the Family Processor user interface. So I'm going to jump into Revit. Over here in Revit, to be able to get access to Family Processor in the first place, you have to have the BIM Manager Suite installed. So I have that. Here's the BIM Manager Suite. Now, if I go ahead and directly click on Family Processor right now, the purpose of this is to work on family files. I can't actually run it from a Revit project file, which is where I am right now. So if I click on Family Processor right now, it's going to yell at me and say, well, you know what? You got to have a family document open before you can actually use it. So let's do that. Let's get a family file open. In fact, I happen to know a family in my project that's giving me some problems. if I scroll down here into my schedules and I go take a look at my door frame schedule, you'll notice that I have a number of families inside of here that are just missing fields. And no matter what I do, I can't actually edit these families or these values right now because they don't have the correct shared parameters that I need. So I'm going to use Family Processor today to actually set up to fix this family and probably many others as well. First, though, I got to find it. Thankfully, my schedule is organized based on level, so I know this happens to be on level 1. Let's go find a level 1 floor plan view here. As I open up level 1 floor plan, it looks like my family is already pre-highlighted, and if I zoom in close here, you can see it's door number 142, which coincidentally happens to match 142 right here. So I know that this is the door that's actually giving me some issues. So let's take this door and edit it out of the project. Normally I would save it out properly, save it to a directory, but in this case I'm just going to cheat and edit it directly. Now once I have this door opened, I'm actually in a family document, and so I can go back to the CTC Management tab, and now when I click on Family Processor, that tool is going to go ahead and load. It's going to pull a license since it's a licensed tool on my BIM Manager suite, and it's going to open up and give me access to the user interface here. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do straight away so that we can make sure we have the cleanest possible settings, since I don't recall what I've last run, is I'm going to go ahead and just start with some brand new settings. We're going to show you why this is important a little bit later on as we make some changes, and Family Processor remembers those changes when I close and reopen the window. But for now, I'm going to clear all my settings out so that we can start to review the user interface and give you an idea of some of the controls that we have. Now, first off, right here across the top, of course, is the app ribbon. This is something that we have in all of our tools, and different tools have different controls up here, most specifically these first sort of 4 options. All of our tools have help, videos, support, and about. For example, for Family Processor, if you wanted to get an introduction, like we're going through right now, or for any of our tools, you can click the videos button, and it'll take you directly to this tool's playlist, the first video of which will be the introduction, what we're doing today. There's also some options inside of here, things to, for example, remember last settings on startup. I always have this checked. There's a few other options, some like automatic deletion of materials, some default junk that you get in your families when you edit them out of projects, some other settings inside of here. You can certainly review those for your own kind of convenience. I'm not going to be modifying any of the defaults today. At the top here, right below that ribbon then, oh, sorry, I missed a setting. There's open settings and save settings, and we're going to be getting to these 2 buttons in the future as we configure some things here that we may want to recall for future use. Now, just below that is the main Family Processor user interface. Across the top are a series of tabs. These tabs represent major steps. They kind of describe these major steps in the family editing workflow. First off, there's some settings that can be applied to all families at the family level while you're processing them. We'll go through some of the specifics here, but one of the settings that I always turn on personally is the when opening families turn on auditing, so that when I'm processing multiple families, I can always guarantee I'm going to get a good clean audit on that family. So it's one that I recommend you also turn on a regular basis. We'll dig into more of these settings here in a minute. The next tab here focuses quite heavily on the MEP teams, though structural and architectural are beginning to use these as well. There's a tab that's dedicated to working with lookup tables, the ability to delete them or re-import lookup tables into families. There's the ability to modify your materials, whether you're deleting them, adding them, or changing them. There's some sub-tabs on a lot of these tabs inside of here where you can, when working with materials, take different actions with them, deleting, adding, or changing them. The next tab here, the Parameters tab, is all about the parameters within the family, as the name might indicate, where you can delete parameters, add shared or add family. You can replace parameters with other shared parameters. You can change parameters. There's a lot with the parameter aspect of families that you can manipulate and modify. And this is actually where most of you probably spend the vast majority of your time when you're working with Family Processor. Now, with these first 4 tabs and their related sub-tabs, sometimes you might need to control the exact order in which something happens. And so we have a processing order tab here where you can actually move up or down the individual tasks or subtasks to kind of control when they happen within the auto processing workflow. An example to that might be you may want to first try to replace certain parameters with shared parameters. Try that first. And then after I replace them, maybe I want to add any shared parameters that couldn't be replaced so that I can guarantee that I first swapped and then added parameters that maybe couldn't be swapped for whatever reason, and then whatever else happens, right? So there's times when you may need to explicitly control the order in which tasks happen, or sometimes you may want to exclude certain tasks from happening. Maybe I don't want it to do certain things, like maybe that family level processing tab, I just want to exclude it this time around. I want to keep my settings, but maybe I want to exclude it. So you have some nice powerful options here with the order control. Now, finally over here you have, well, not finally, I guess, you have the ability to choose which families to process, whether it be the current family file, which is something that I will be doing today, or you can actually give it multiple files to work with. So you can process hundreds or thousands of families with the same settings. Great, again, for upgrading a family library. And when you're doing that process, certain settings that might apply to that. And then finally, this is the finally tab, the last log. So what it last did, the last time you ran it, what did it do for something? So you can always come back to this log tab and see what you last had done and potentially save it out if there's potentially manual operations you got to go do. So let's actually go through and try this out. Let's actually start working with these settings and actually manipulating some of this family here. So one of the things that I want to do is kind of figure out with this door some of the major tasks that I want to kind of execute. Now, I did mention the whole auditing when I'm turning things on. There's other things that I often like to do, which if you have a template family file that has all of the units of measure that you like to use in a family, you can leverage this units of measure family file and other settings as well inside of there to guarantee that it matches up. Let me give an example. Most of the families that I work on, they're usually going to be door sized or even some mid to large equipment sized. But most of these are like 12 feet long at the most. In that range, a lot of the time, I measure items in inches. I don't necessarily need inches and feet because a lot of the fine details on here are 0 foot, maybe 1/2 inch, right? Really small. And so instead of having to keep typing, 1/2 inch mark, I could just type in 0.5 and have that be the 1/2 inch or 0.75 or 0.3875, whatever I want, and have that be the dimensions. Or maybe you're working in metric and you want to always work in your families in millimeters specifically. You could do that. So of course you could go here to manage and you could go to your project units for your family and modify these items one by one. But when you start getting into some of the other disciplines like HVAC, electrical, and piping, there's a lot of settings inside of there, structural as well. And if you have a template family that has all of the units of measure set up exactly the way that you like them while you're working within the family editor environment, you can use that as a template. Now, I believe I used to have one on my desktop. I misplaced it, so I don't actually have it anymore. So I'm not going to be setting that option today. But normally, I could just browse to an RFA that has all the settings that I need and be good to go. Now, we just actually sort of saw one of the options that we have set here in action. Remember last settings on startup. Now, when I first opened this up, I made some brand new settings. I cleared everything out. And just now, I closed Family Processor, opened it back up, and it remembered that I had checked these two boxes. And had I gone through a bunch of other tabs, it would remember that as well. That's incredibly convenient because while you're using this tool Family Processor, there's plenty of times, especially when I'm changing parameters over here, where I need to jump out of this dialog, go look at something in the family, and then come right back. I don't want to lose my settings. This helps me by retaining all of my settings. Really keeps me on track, keeps me going with exactly what I need when I close and open it up. And then when I'm all done, of course, I can save my settings. Now within here, you can also force categorical changes. Plenty of times when I'm working through a whole series of families and some of the stuff that I've saved out might be an incorrect category. So if I know that what I'm processing is all going to be doors, I can force it to all be using the doors category specifically. Sometimes this can be really helpful. In my case today, my categories are already all going to be doors, so I'm going to leave this as no change. But you can also modify some of the other sub options, like is it shared or not? Does it have its room calculation point turned off or on, or left alone? Is it work plane based or always vertical? Like, there's some nice options inside of here that you can work with. Sometimes when you're opening up really old families, you might get parameters in just some random sorting. Now, Revit's pretty good these days about sorting alphabetically by default, but sometimes you open up some old content that doesn't have that, and one of the things you can do is force sort parameters by name within groups, so it'll automatically alphabetize within a particular group all the parameters inside of there. Sometimes I like doing this if I haven't explicitly controlled the order myself. You might like to do that as well. You can also force text casing within all text parameters if you want to. I know a lot of you still like that uppercase methodology of writing out all of your text. Some of you have begun transitioning over to title casing, and so you might want to force all text values in your families to all turn into title casing. You can do that if you want to, or of course, you can leave it alone as well. Now I'm going to skip over lookup tables because this really is just deleting or importing lookup tables. And in today's session, I don't have a good reason to be importing a lookup table here, but there's plenty of times when I've gone through and have maybe metric and imperial lookup tables and I want to import them into every family. Sometimes I have electrical lookup tables for NEC or CEC standards that I want to import into all my families. There's a lot of reasons why I might do this. And so these are some really powerful tools here to rapidly import your lookup tables, and then you can leverage them very quickly on your parameters step over here. Before I get to that though, let's jump into changing materials as the next tab in line. And one of the things that I notice is that every single time I edit a family out of a project, I always end up with all of these trash materials, a bunch of analytical surface materials, most of which do nothing. This CTC wood lumber is actually mine, so I'm going to keep it. Let's add these to my selected materials list down below, and they're going to get deleted when this family gets processed. As I'm doing this, by the way, all of the settings that are on these change tabs, change materials, change parameters right here, these settings are all sourced directly from the family that I have open, which is why I edited in particular a family that I knew was problematic, because I can begin to fix it directly. Also notice that as I add things from this upper list to the lower list, in almost all cases, they'll get removed from this upper list. Again, here's a bunch of default trash materials that I don't need that don't really relate to my doors. So I can add those materials down below. The exterior finish, I believe maybe I'm using, so I'll keep it. Laminate white I'm using, metal door I'm using. Phase materials I know I'm not using at all in this family. In fact, none of these I'm using. I'm not using systems and zones. This is an architectural door family. So I've basically added to this lower list a bunch of materials that I really don't need, and I probably don't need or don't use these across the vast majority of my family files. I may very well use them in a project, but they're not useful in a family, and for whatever reason, Revit likes to add them to every single family when they've been saved out of a project. Now, if you've used some of our other tools, like the BIM batch suite, to save a whole bunch of families out, this right here, deleting of these trash materials, can actually save you about 1/4 of a meg of file size across all your families in your libraries, and that can turn into a big deal, especially if you're seeking out space on your network. Now, if you wanted to, you could add materials. We might come back to this a little later in one of our steps, depending on what we do in the change parameters area over here. In the materials to change, though, there is one change that I always make. I always take the default material that exists in pretty much every family and sometimes gets used, and I like to make it sort of an obvious color. By default, the default material is gray. It just sits there as a gray tone, almost like this gray background back here or this gray right here. It's kind of boring, kind of flat, doesn't really stand out, doesn't help me understand that I'm not using real materials. And so I like to take the default material and set the red and blue values to 0. I leave the green this 127, which is kind of a mid-green. And I change the transparency to 50. So what this does is takes the default material and turns it into sort of a green glass material. And what that will do is when I'm looking through my families after I've finished with my processing, if I see anything out there that's got that green glass color, I can often see and identify that and understand that maybe I need to take some action in my family if those materials aren't something I'm expecting to see. It doesn't affect my project at all because when the default material comes into the project, its material is what kind of takes over. Now let's jump into the really important tab here, change parameters. Now for this to work, one of the things you always want to make sure you do is browse yourself to a proper shared parameters file. Now to keep today a little bit organized, a little bit more efficient, I'm going to browse to a fairly small shared parameter file. Yours probably has thousands of parameters in it, and that's great. You can absolutely use that. This tool, Family Processor, works really well with large shared parameter files. But what I'm going to do today with Family Processor, where did it go? There it is, Shared Parameter Manager, SuperDoor parameters, these guys right here. You'll notice it's a really small file. But I'm going to use this because I know it has all of my door parameters in it. If I wanted to use this out of the box, or not out of the box, my larger sort of corporate shared parameter file, I could absolutely do that. This one has a couple thousand parameters in it. It just takes a little bit longer to find what I'm looking for. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use a slightly smaller file. We'll see this file come into play when we get to adding shared parameters and replacing shared parameters. So we'll get to that in just a minute here. Now within the family, I can actually see a whole bunch of parameters that already exist inside of here. These are custom parameters that exist in the family that somebody at some point added. Now I can look through them and I can see what the parameter types are just so I can understand what's going on here. For example, looking through this, I'm seeing that the parameter named panel material is text. That's actually a problem for me because I'm pretty sure this isn't my shared parameter, or it might not even be a shared parameter at all. And I want to be able to add a parameter called panel material. That's my shared parameter, but mine's a material definition. And so for me to be able to work with this one, I need to delete it. So I'm going to actually add the panel material to my deleted list. So if my parameter types don't match up just by scanning through here, I can quickly identify that and just add it to my delete list. And I know then that I need to explicitly add that panel material shared parameter, which I'm going to do next. So I'm going to go over here to add shared parameters. Now with this shared parameter file, I can simply search for anything that matches whatever I want. I don't have to go group by group and discover, what parameters might exist where. I can simply search through my entire shared parameter file, find anything that matches Matt, whether it be in the name material, in the parameter type, or in the group, and I can simply quickly find, in this case, panel material and add that into my family. Now the nice thing here is that panel material is going to pick up on the group that it came out of in my shared parameter file and by default go to materials and finishes. Another example of this might be, do I have copyright in here? I do. Copyright is a text parameter in the group identity data. Now by default, when you make a text parameter in Revit, it wants to go to the text group. It's a new group. But for me, this is supposed to go to identity data. I've indicated that in my shared parameter file. I've grouped it that way. And Family Processor can pick up on that and automatically put copyright into the correct group so that I don't have to remember where it was before. I can also, by the way, set the formula for this. So copyright CTC 2023 or something, whatever. I can put whatever I want there, even including the formula itself, and it'll establish this as the formula and the value. Now, one thing I'm noticing here, and you may have noticed this as well, panel material came in with a default value of WD. It did that because within my family back here in the background, even though I'm deleting the value panel material as a text value, but the text value has something in it. And that value, Family Processor, is picking up on that, and it's saying, hey, the value is WD, and I'm going to try to keep it. I can either keep it or I can throw it away. If I want to keep it, I have to have an actual material in my family that's called out as WD, so I can use it, or instead specify a real material that's actually in my family. That's what I probably should do. If I go to change materials over here, I can look through my remaining materials, like CTC wood lumber. Maybe that's what I want it to be. If I want that to be the value, I could take that parameter. Now, I can't copy it from here. I could add it to my changed list over here, potentially, so I can steal the name. No, I can't steal the name, just kidding. Can't steal it. So I may have to just type it out, CTC underscore wood dash lumber. Or, since I want to use a new feature here, I'm going to use the add material option. Specifically, I want to add WD to my materials list, And it doesn't really matter what its properties are. I just want it there so that my parameter over here can use it. This is where controlling the order in which something happens is really important. I need to make sure that material exists before I add the parameter. And if you remember, one of my choices here is processing order. And you'll notice that I'm adding a material here, and then I'm adding a shared parameter down here, which is great because the material will exist. Then it adds the shared parameter and sets its value, and I'm good to go. This is something that I think about while I'm building up my settings over here. You can choose, if you want to, as well, to add family parameters. There's some times when I've added explicit ad hoc family parameters to my content when it wasn't a shared parameter. I want to do that consistently, potentially, just for a setting, even though it's not shared. Here's another really powerful feature, and the one that probably most of us will use the vast majority of the time, and that is replacing parameters in our family with shared parameters. And this, again, is where Family Processor can be really, really powerful. So I know that they've got a parameter called panel finish. It's a material definition. If I add this down below, because I have in my shared parameter file also a panel finish parameter, and it's the same data type, it's going to automatically map that up because the names are the same, the data types are the same, it'll match it directly. In fact, there's quite a few of these that I could probably steal and just add down below. If I add those, yeah, panel width automatically gets added. Panel width 1 and panel width 2 do not. If I expand this list, I can actually see if there's a leaf parameter or a panel A or B parameter. Looks like in this shared parameter file, there isn't anything that matches this, so I can't actually match that up. That's okay. I'll just remove those selected items from my list and stick with the panel width right here. Swing angle, that one I'm pretty sure I have a parameter for. It's just called angle though, not swing angle. And so I want to actually choose that as my parameter. There might be some parameters for trim. In this case, there might not be as well. Let's see here. Let's see, frame finish. Yep, I care about that one. I think frame depth is a property. Yeah, that one already actually matches up as well. Base plate. I think in my case, it's actually got a different name. I think it's called kick plate. Oh, it's not in this shared parameter file. My much larger shared parameter file has a property that's called kick plate or potentially threshold. Depends on which one it is I want to be using. So in this case, though, I can just swap out these few shared parameters. Now, finally, last tab over here are parameters to change. One thing I didn't point out in the main family, and I should probably do that now. Let's close this out. Remember, Family Processor recalls all your settings. Within my family over here, if I go to family types, I can take a look at things like panel finish and frame finish. Now, these two parameters, you might notice, do not have the little parenthesis default option after them. And that's because they're type parameters. It's kind of an indicator that I can use, or I could also go here to edit the parameter and see how this is set up. I know it's a shared parameter, but I'm pretty sure it's not my shared parameter. I can also tell you that, yes, in fact, it is type, not an instance, but I want it to be an instance. So if I ever run across panel finish and frame finish, for me, those are instance parameters. I change the finishes instance by instance or floor by floor, room by room. And so I don't want those to be type properties. The materials I want to be type, but the finishes I want to be instance. That's my choice. Of course, you may have your own choices. So within Family Processor over here, one of the things that I want to change is for both of those finish parameters. So if I do search for finish, there we go, frame and panel finish, I'm going to add those to my list below, and I want those both to be set to instance. It'll default to whatever the value was in the current family. What I want it to be is instance here. I could also regroup them if I needed to. So if I found any parameters inside of here that were grouped poorly, I could certainly regroup them however I see fit. Potentially, there's times when I'm working with something and I might want to change the value of it. I might want to change the formula that something might be using. So you can use this parameters to change to either harvest good parameters from good families with their formulas and their groupings, or you can fix something in a broken family and then again apply those same exact changes across hundreds of families potentially. Now, once again, we can jump over here to the processing order. We can take a look at the order in which something is going to be happening. right? So family level processing, deleting lookup tables, importing lookup tables, deleting materials, adding, changing them, right? All the things that we might need to do. So now let's go through and actually make some changes here. And so what we're going to do is actually execute a repair of a particular individual family, which is the one we have open. This is a fantastic way to do some preliminary testing. So back here in Family Processor, we're going to jump over to Select Families and Begin, and we are going to very specifically fix the current family file. So it's not going to actually save the current file. It's not going to open it and save it because it's already open. It's going to let me save it after I visually validate what's going on. This is an incredibly powerful way of using this tool to validate your settings live in a family. Later, we can come back and run this against multiple family files potentially and take a look at some of the options for that. But first, let's just try this on the current family and see what it's going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and just click Begin Processing. Now, before it actually kicks off, it likes to give you a little reminder of all the things you told it to do. If it's going to open families, it's going to audit them when it opens them. It's going to delete all these materials here. It's going to add a material called wood. It's going to change the default and make it sort of that green minty color. It's deleting the parameters panel material so that it can turn around and add it again later and set its value back. It's also going to be replacing with all of these shared parameters. So replacing panel finish and panel width and so on with our shared parameters out of our shared parameter file. It's adding also copyright and setting its value with a formula. It's changing frame finish and panel finish to automatically be instance, and then it's going to sort alphabetically all of the parameters within our current groups. So I'm going to tell this to go ahead and continue. And it's going to rip through my current family. It's going to do all the things that I've asked of it. And it's going to come back with a report at the very end at this little last log tab right here, telling me everything that it actually did. And it looks like everything that I did was successful. Nothing had any kind of issues. So if I close this out and commit the changes to my open family document, now I can inspect all the things that I asked of it. Now I need to make sure real quick here that I have the correct shared parameter file mapped. So let's just do this real quick. Shared parameters, I'm going to browse for the correct shared parameter file, which for me is on my C drive. In my little demo folder right here, I've got some settings with shared parameters, and there's my SuperDoor parameters. This is an important step, making sure that Revit and your family processor are using the same shared parameter file, so that when we go in and validate some things like panel finish right here, you'll notice it's now default. Panel finish here, if I go edit this parameter, you'll notice it says shared parameter still, it did before, but now I can no longer export it. I could before. I can no longer export it because it's already in my selected shared parameter file. It's also set up as an instance coincidentally, which is fantastic. Panel material here, this actually still has the value of wood, but you'll notice that this is a shared parameter. Again, I can't export it, so it's mine. It's a material definition, and its value here is WD. If we look at the materials that are available for this, you may notice here, if I expand this out a little bit here in the middle, my list of materials is pretty short, and that's because all of my other junk materials got deleted out, and all it left behind were the ones that I told it to leave behind. And here in this case, WD was one of those materials that it generated brand new. Now I also want to point out the default material here. Notice how its color is green and its transparency is 50. It set that for me. Family Processor made that modification. So now if for whatever reason this default material is used in my family, I'll see sort of this green glass color at play in my family. There's other parameters inside of here like panel width. If I go take a look at this parameter, it again is a shared parameter and it's mine. I can no longer export that. Scrolling down very far down here, identity data copyright now exists, and it's established by a formula, copyright CTC 2023. So all those parameters that I asked it to change, it automated this. Now if I want to use this across a whole bunch of families, I can verify first that it worked here, and now I could potentially apply this across multiple families really quickly. So how would I do that? Well, if I jump up here into the CTC Management tab again and I jump into Family Processor, we're going to take a look at how you could potentially recall some settings by saving them and then loading them back up later so that I can use this on multiple files, even if I reset my settings. And then we're going to take a look at some of those multiple settings or multiple processing over here in the Select Families tab. First off, since I know that I like these, let's save them. Save them someplace. Now for me, I'm going to save these into my settings folder again, and I have well, I'm going to make a new folder here because I don't have one yet. I'm going to call it Family Processor. If I could spell, that'd be great. Family Processor, and these maybe are my super door fix settings or something, whatever you want to call it, right? This might be for a particular manufacturer, whatever you need. So I can save this, and then if I was ever to come back in here and completely clear out my settings, if I hit new settings here, clears them all out, so it forgets all the things that I had just done, the materials that I told it to delete, the parameters I told it to change or add or fix or replace, all that's gone because I hit new settings. But it's just easy now for me to go over here and hit open settings, reload my Family Processor settings that I just saved out, and now it's got all of my configuration ready to go again. So this now becomes 100% repeatable. I can take these settings and use them again and again and again, and I can also reset them with other settings for other purposes. Now, if I wanted to run these on multiple families, over on the Select Families and Begin tab, I would jump to Multiple Family Files. Here, what I could do is browse for a parent folder, someplace that maybe has a whole bunch of families on it, choose those families, add them to the processing list, and then down below, I can actually tell it maybe this is a 2022 folder, and I want to upgrade them to 2023. I could force it to save them to an alternate parent folder if I wanted to. If my parent folder here was the 2023 main folder, and I found thousands of families, I could process all of them and have it automatically open them, audit them, and save them in a new directory, including the rebuilding of the subdirectories. It'll automatically do that as well. You can also force it to add a prefix or add a suffix to the families as it saves them. You can force it to resave them even if no changes were needed. So maybe everything is perfect in those families and all you're doing is upgrading them. You're opening with an audit and upgrading. Well, that's great. Even if nothing changes in the family, it can still save it forward to that alternate parent folder. You can force a preview image override on the family if you have a particular view inside of there that you want to be using. Maybe you've leveraged one of our other CTC tools like Family Preview Manager to guarantee that they have a particular preview view pre-configured. You can set that automatically here as the preview view if you want, in case it wasn't already set. You can also force Family Processor to harvest any unknown shared parameters from all the families you process into a brand new shared parameter file. So I can browse for where that new shared parameter file will go, and then as a BIM manager, you can use that combined with Shared Parameter Manager up here to actually compare your current corporate standard shared parameter file and this newly kind of found shared parameter file with all these discovered parameters to figure out maybe other actions you should be taking for other repairs on your family library. For those of you who really like type catalogs, I'm in that group. I love type catalogs when I've got more than like 3 or 5 types. I like to create type catalog files from my families. So you can actually delete the types from the families themselves when it creates these type catalogs, because each type will be harvested and it will then build those types up. You can force it to include instance parameters if you want to, so it sets their default values. Some people do this, some people don't. You can force it to sort the parameters that it discovers alphabetically within the file, so it makes it a little easier to navigate through it. You can also force it to sort the types alphabetically, something that I personally always do. And when you're saving out these .csv files or these .txt files, normally a type catalog is a TXT, I like to save them actually as a CSV because they natively open up in Excel a little bit more quickly, and then I can kind of work with that. And then when you're discovering these parameters, sometimes there's certain things that are type parameters or even instance parameters that you do not want to include. So you can actually exclude parameters here just by typing out names of parameters that you do not want to be in that type catalog, if you want to just make that type catalog a little shorter. Or if you open it up in Excel, you can simply delete the columns pretty quickly as well, and that way you can make the decision later. Personally, that's what I do. So if I was to click begin processing, had I chosen a bunch of families, well, let's just do this real quick. I'm not actually going to process these because there won't be a lot for it to do, but if I was to go find some stuff like in program data, Autodesk, maybe I want to process the Revit out of the box content here in 2020. So if I was to go look at US Imperial content for doors, since we're talking doors today, there are a bunch of subfolders here. I have the checkbox set to actually search the subfolders, so it will scan the doors folder and all the subfolders here when I click OK. It comes back with all the doors that it's discovering from those folders and tells me the full path to those doors. So if I wanted to add these to my list, I could simply grab, well, I could just select all of them and add them to my processing list. And then if I was to actually click begin processing here, it'll open up each and every door. It'll take all the steps that I've asked of it for each individual door family. And then when it's all done, it saves it and gives me a log file at the very end. Again, super powerful. I've already validated that those settings that I've asked for work, and they work at least on this door family, but I could also run them on any other collection of content as well and have it be all super nice, neat, and clean, and creating me types for any families that don't have type catalogs, which is great. All right. So I'm pretty much done with the whole sort of introduction to Family Processor. Now, in just a moment, we're going to jump into a questions and answers section. But for those of you who don't like to hang out for the QA portion, I want to say thank you. We always appreciate when you do show up live and have the option to ask us questions in the QA window. If we feel that it makes it more interesting for you, it certainly makes it more interesting for us when we get the opportunity to interact with you. We do encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching this as a recording, so you can get access to all of our videos when they go live from our webinar recordings. But with that, I'm going to do one final thank you. We do hope that you all had got some good information out of this. We do hope to see you in future CTC webinars, and you can find out about those by going to ctcsoftware.com/events. And from there, you can actually sign up for any of the future webinars that we have coming down the line here for any of our tools, whether it be an introduction or a workflow video, all of them. So with that, we'll catch you later. We hope you have a fantastic day.